Aloha and welcome to Island Connections. I'm Ibrahim Aoude. Iran and the US. And this topic we have with us Farideh Farhi. She's an independent researcher and professor, adjunct professor of political science at the University of Hawai'i, Mānoa. So welcome Farideh, and thank you for joining the program to talk about this very timely topic. I have a map of the Middle East, and we want to show the viewers where is Iran in relationship to the Middle East and parts of Central Asia as well. Okay, so we show the map, and then you might want to say a few things about the map and Iran's location, geographic location in that.
Okay, this map actually sort of gives a lot of emphasis to the North African part and West African part of Africa in that sense, and the Middle East is to the side. But if it's, if the focus of the map is on the Middle East, obviously you can see the geostrategic position of Iran. Not only Iran is a large country, but it's geostrategically located. On the southern side of it, you see obviously the Persian Gulf and the very, very critical Strait of Hormuz, where a very large part of global petroleum passes through. In this map, if you look, Saudi Arabia at the bottom and Iran at the top, that's exactly where the Strait of Hormuz is located. Iran has a very long coastline, and in that sense, geostrategically has quite a bit of, you could say, control over the area. And then on the northern part of Iran, you can see Iran is connected to Central Asia. The Caspian Sea, again, an important and increasingly important water. A sea is actually a large lake where many Central Asian countries explore petroleum on the top. So Iran is very as I suggested, strategically located. It is also a very large country with relatively large population. It has 3 times the population of Iraq, a much larger population than Saudi Arabia. It's close now between 75 to 80 million people. Iran is also very rich in terms of resources, and its resources include both petroleum as well as natural gas. And people have argued that if you put them together as fossil fuel, Iran probably has the largest reserves in the world, even larger than Saudi Arabia if you combine natural gas and petroleum together. So as a country, one can easily argue that it is a very important country, both in terms of its size as well as its large population and as well as its location.
Yeah, and in terms of the oil and gas also, even with the new find in the Mediterranean of this huge basin that presumably would be shared by a number of countries from Turkey and Cyprus, Syria, Lebanon, the State of Israel, and Egypt. Still, like Iran, would still be a very important player in that kind of resource.
Eventually, part of the difficulty that Iran has is because of the kind of sanctions that have been imposed on Iran by the United States that are abided by other countries, because those sanctions essentially punish other countries that invest in the Iranian oil and gas sector, is that other countries in the region are actually using or exploring joint fields. For example, Qatar another country on the Persian Gulf, essentially is very much, has very much developed the oil fields that are joined with Iran. So what has happened in Iran is actually that although there is tremendous amount of production of natural gas inside Iran, it is mostly used for internal consumption because they have not been able to rely on foreign capital as well as foreign technology to export the gas. They have tried to create pipelines that eventually take that gas to Pakistan as well as India, but that hasn't come into effect. Iran exports gas to Turkey, and that's a long-standing relationship. But generally speaking, one could argue that unlike the petroleum sector, where Iran is a major player in the global market, in the petroleum sector, it has not been, has not yet become a global player in the gas market.
In the gas, yeah. This map I'm showing, if we can go back to the map, this map I'm showing because sometimes we look at this region as a whole and say North Africa and Middle East, or Middle East and North Africa. And sometimes we talk about it as the Middle East, at least especially the North African part as part of the Middle East. But this map is also good in the sense that it shows what kind of relations that might be between Iran and, say, Algeria even.
Exactly.
Already Iranian Prime Minister, Foreign Minister is in Tunisia today.
Exactly.
And Tunisia is right next between Algeria and Libya. So, and they've been to Libya as well, some delegations and so on. So that's the the reach of Iranian regional foreign policy in terms of oil, gas, and other geostrategic.
Yes, particularly since that, the Arab Spring, where, you see all sorts of political changes in the region, and of course the rise, for example, in a country like Tunisia, of Islamist parties into power, and potentially, of course, ultimately even Egypt, the Islamists not only being the dominant force in the parliament, but also eventually taking over the presidency. The Iranian political establishment has made an argument to talk about what is happening in the Arab world, not as the way we talk about it in the United States in terms of merely democratization. They acknowledge the democratization part of it, but they also talk about it in terms of an Islamic awakening. And therefore, given the fact that the Islamic Republic is an Islamic Republic and presumably went through its major political change over 30 years ago, where an Islamic political system has come into play, despite the fact that there are differences, Iran being a Shiite Islamic establishment. Nevertheless, the framing of what has happened in the Arab world inside Iran is that it has created an opportunity for Iran to develop relationships with countries that used to be within the sphere of influence of Western and secular regimes. And therefore, this has created an opportunity for Iran to engage in a much more aggressive and active foreign policy that would not separate the countries the way it used to in the past.
Yeah, because I remember when was it, 6 weeks to 8 weeks ago, there was this huge international conference, As-Sahwa al-Islamiyya, which is the Islamic awakening. And it's for good reason that the Iranians would want to characterize what happened as Islamic, because they're looking at, okay, this way we'll have good relations with Tunisia, with Egypt, blah, 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 etc. Because to me and you, it's not like an Islamic awakening thing. It has its political, economic, and other.
Exactly. But that's part and parcel of the kind of geo-strategic struggle that is going on and competition. So the Saudis and the Qataris also would like to think of it in terms of the countries moving towards quote-unquote Islam, but their version of Islam.
And they've been, I'm sorry, but they've been financing that.
Exactly, right? Exactly. The problem for the Saudis and the Qataris is that even though they are financing, Islamist groups in Egypt or other countries, even in Syria as part and parcel of the conflict, the violent conflict that is going on there, is that clearly the democratization aspect of this Islamism makes the policies that the Iranians have pursued, whether it's in relationship to their opposition to the Israeli occupation in the area or their rejection of sort of monarchic authoritarianism of the old Arab patriarch, are more popular, among the democratic forces in these, or at least these Islamist parties that are coming to power. So there is a real struggle to sort of, pull these movements to become much more, to develop better relationships with various countries. The Saudis are very afraid that these movements will eventually move countries like Syria or Egypt and Tunisia in a direction that they would not like. And the Iranians, of course, are very much interested in making sure that the direction taken will not take these countries in the same direction that they used to be, which was, obviously Egypt and Iran have not had full diplomatic relationship for a long period of time. This was the policy that was pursued under Mubarak. They still do not have full diplomatic relations, and the Iranians would like to develop full diplomatic relations, and the Saudis do not. And that becomes part and parcel of this competition that is going on between major players in the region, Saudi Arabia and Iran.
Now, this is a very good context to what the main topic is, Iran and the US. But if we go back to the map, I'd just like to contextualize it concretely. Okay, here we have this Middle East, North Africa, and then you have the US, of course, is very much interested in oil and gas and other geostrategic resources in the area, and of course location and all that. And then you have people who don't want to go along with what the US wants in terms of agenda of dominating the area for oil and gas and other reasons. So Iran is one of those that presents a kind of a problem to the U.S.
It calls itself axis of resistance, being part of the axis of resistance. And if you go look at the map, you see Iran. And then, of course, there is Iraq, that Iran increasingly has tremendous amount of influence. Iraq gets connected to Syria. Again, another country that has had problematic relationship with the United States. And of course, ultimately, it reaches into Lebanon, where at least in parts of it, you have in southern parts of Lebanon, you have Hezbollah, a Shiite political party that is now part of the coalition government in Lebanon and has been a very close ally of both Syria and Iran. Meanwhile, as you suggested, United States merely does not, United States is effectively a Middle Eastern power. It is present. It is not only present in the Indian Ocean, it is its aircraft carriers are in the Persian Gulf, its bases are in the Persian Gulf, Bahrain, another country that is going through tremendous amount of trouble, in Kuwait, in Qatar. You have all these American bases that are located there, and the only reason that you can explain that presence in the region, obviously, has to do with what is identified in various American national security documents as America's vital interest, which is free flow of oil through the Persian Gulf, which effectively means control over free flow of oil by the United States in the Persian Gulf, because increasingly United States does not get as much oil from the region. It is the Europeans and East Asian countries, Japan, China, Korea, that are very much dependent on the oil that passes through the Persian Gulf. So United States' interest is essentially control over that oil.
So control free flow for the U.S. so it can control it for other reasons, including like European politics.
European politics, exactly.
And then deny it to, say, the Chinese, for instance, And in this way, they can like have the Europeans do its own bidding, say, I don't know, in Libya or someplace like that, although the French had their own reasons for going into Libya as well. But this is very important because, now things are framed in terms of relationship between Iran and the U.S. in terms of the nuclear energy and nuclear, arms and all that. So is it about nuclear, or is it about that and maybe other things, and using this nuclear issue for bigger and reasons as you have suggested?
Okay, well, nuclear energy is important in the sense that both the Iranians as well as United States, as well as other regional competitors like Saudi Arabia and Israel, think that if Iran gets the capability to build a nuclear weapon, not even nuclear weapon, but the capability to build nuclear weapon, then it gives Iran the kind of stability and gravitas that would allow it, given its size, resources, and the positions that it has taken, to become what they consider to be a hegemonic player in the region. In the sense that, given its size, it can, tell other countries what to do. That is what they are afraid of. From the Iranian point of view, nuclear energy and the ability to withstand the kind of pressures that have been imposed on it, and in fact, ultimately engage in negotiations with the United States to maintain its program, will give it the ability to withstand American pressures and ultimately become the player that matches its capabilities and gravitas in the region. So it is only in that sense it's important that it has become important because of this 10-year conflict of outsiders trying to tell Iran, you cannot do this, and the Iranians saying that this is a, question of our sovereignty and our capability to pursue what we want to do, even if it is in opposition to the mandates of a superpower. And so it is in that sense that if ultimately the issue of the nuclear issue is resolved, the Iranians themselves would feel that they have managed to overcome this bullying practice, as they call it, that has been employed by United States. So even if it was not important at some issue, and as you suggest, the issue is much larger and has to do with the issue of Iran's role in the region and whether or not it can pursue the policies that question American presence in the region. With this particular government. So that's the main issue, which is the United States essentially saying Iran, as constituted the way it is, cannot be a major regional player. The issue that both sides have played on is the nuclear issue to make that claim.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's an excellent point, actually. And here we have, like, in terms of the play between the U.S. and Iran on all these things that we have mentioned thus far, and competition on, like, control of the region, at least like the eastern part, of the Mediterranean. Um, there are a number of regional competitors for Iran, and these are huge competitors, and each has its own power. I mean, we can start with Israel, and Israel with its relationship to the United States and so forth, and then Israel's control of U.S. Congress in terms of policy and so forth, so far as Israel is concerned, and moving U.S. policy to be like along the lines of Israeli policy in the area for a huge you know um, extent. The other one is Turkey. And Turkey, of course, I mean, when you talk about Turkey, it's not only Turkey, it's NATO. I mean, yeah, because there are
Exactly.
treaties and all that kind of stuff. And to me, I'm thinking like Turkey has like this thing about trying to compete, or be an adversary of Iran or some other power in the Middle East, even Israel, is like talking about, well, I am not alone. I have NATO behind me. And then you mentioned Saudi Arabia as another competitor, etc. So how do you see Iran relating to all these major players in relationship to what the U.S. Role or U.S. relations with Iran? How
Okay.
do they all factor in?
I mean, it is important to understand that there is this global play that is going on, which is the United States having an interest in the Middle East because of its resources, and therefore, and wanting to be the hegemonic power in the Middle East. And therefore, Iranian challenge is something that is not acceptable. Okay, and United States has pursued policies to prevent that. Presumably even attacking Iraq was framed within the context of trying to disempower Iran further, sort of create a situation where Iran is surrounded completely by American forces, on one side Afghanistan and on the other side Iraq. And now you also have the fight over Syria, where even some American pundit openly talk about the fact that if Syria or Assad's regime falls, then Iran's power is reduced. So you have this broader global struggle. But then, as you point out, there are also these regional players, and one has to deal with each of them separately. Israel, is the only nuclear weapon state in the region. Undeclared. Presumably, it has a bomb in the basement. It has not,
There's 200 of them.
yeah, 200.
At
We don't
least.
know. We don't know whatever. It's an undeclared nuclear weapon state, not part of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and it has repeatedly made an argument that if Iran has the nuclear capability, is a threat to Israel's geopolitical presence. So they are very much worried about, because Iran has taken such anti-occupation point of view, anti-Israeli point of view, that this essentially Iran's position will be so strengthened, and it will allow Iran to be part of all the negotiations that are going on in the Middle East. And of course, one of the most important negotiations in the Middle East that has to happen and used to happen is over the question of occupation and the Palestinian issue. So the Israelis have always been worried, and they have defined their policies, their recent policies in relationship to Iran in those terms. Saudi Arabia is threatened for a different reason, but ultimately, the situation becomes as such that Saudi Arabia and Israel become, in some ways, partners in their opposition to Iran. The Islamic Revolution from the beginning was also a challenge to Saudi Arabia. Ayatollah Khomeini, the founder of revolution, even thought having relationship with Saudi Arabia was even more of a no-no than having relationship with United States, because the Saudis are essentially a monarchic system, in a kind of system that Khomeini overthrew, and his movement overthrew, and never considered them to be a legitimate government. And therefore, the kind of challenge that you see coming from Iran not only challenges the type of a system that the Saudis have, the monarchic system, but precisely the relationship the Saudis have with the United States. And essentially portrays Saudi Arabia as an illegitimate government and a dependent government on, on the United States. And of course, that is in line with so much of the feelings that you have in the Middle East among the populations in the Middle East, that the Saudi government really doesn't have an independent foreign policy. It does whatever the United States does, and obviously it has the money to throw its weight around. And the Iranian position is very much a challenge for that. And you can actually see that in what happened in Bahrain, where a small country near Saudi Arabia, in the southern part, where a dynasty, a monarchic system that is very close to Saudi Arabia, rules a large population that has close affinities to Iran. It's a Shiite population, the majority, and in fact, the fight for democracy in Bahrain has been framed by Saudi Arabia essentially as being cooked up by the Iranians to challenge a monarchy that is close to Saudi Arabia, and ultimately led to Saudi interference in Bahrain. So that's another thing. Now, Turkey is much more interesting because Turkey obviously does have, quote unquote, an Islamist party in power. It does represent itself as an alternative in some ways to the Iranian Islamist form of government that is democratically based. It also tries to play on this idea that Turkey is a bridge and therefore can have connections to a NATO or European Union, but also be a model for these new Islamist government that are coming to power. And it has played, tried to play that role. The problem Turkey ultimately ends up and it was having, and it was revealed in the Syrian dynamic, is that that relationship with NATO ultimately shows itself up. And Turkey has a hard time, ultimately, bottom line, presenting itself as having an independent foreign policy. It has tried to do that, and in fact, in the wake of what happened in Iraq and the Turkey's decision not to participate in the invasion of Iraq, therefore, it did give, gravitas to Turkey as an independent player. But as we are seeing in the case of Syria, it's having a hard time playing that role, even though it began, its opposition to what was happening in Syria was very, very much based on the kind of brutality that was going on in Syria. And Turkey being a neighboring state to Syria, unlike Iran, which is not, therefore, so much of what it was doing was very much part and parcel of the reaction to this very brutal regime that is engaging in very brutal tactics. But increasingly, as the problem of Syria has become internationalized, And people have talked about it in terms of this grander geopolitical game that is not only going on between United States and Iran, but also United States and Russia and China, because Russia also has tremendous amount of interest. Turkey has had a very, very hard time separating itself, not only from United States, but also separating itself from these very reactionary regimes like Saudi Arabia and Qatar, which are supporting the Free Syrian Army with arms and money. So Turkey's position has become a lot less, at least seemingly, independent.
And in fact, recent events and diplomatic, political, and other kinds of incursions into Iraq by Turkey shows that, in fact, they haven't relented in terms of the role they're playing in Syria, and now they want to expand it to Iraq. So if something is not working, like the one in Syria, why would you want to, you know?
Yeah, the Kurdish dynamic has a, I mean, the Turkey-Iraqi dynamic has another added twist to it, which has to do with the, independent Kurdish region in northern Iraq that also borders both Iran and Turkey, and the concerns that the Turks have always had, because they have their own Turkish problem. Now, it was interesting that for a while, the Iranians and the Turks were cooperating on the Kurdish question and in terms of their incursions into Iraqi Kurdistan, because both of them had, there were elements in Iraqi Kurdistan that were, coming into both countries, trying to promote more rights for the Iranian Kurds as well as the Turkish Kurds. So there was a convergence of interest between Turkey and Iran. However, as the Iranian government has gained more and more foothold in Iraq in general, and particularly in relationship to the central government that is essentially controlled by folks that are very close to Iran. And during the Iran-Iraq war, they spent quite a bit of time in Iran. Increasingly, Turkey feels a little bit isolated, despite a lot of trade relationships with for lack of better word, Arab Iraq. Therefore, Turkey is now trying to find a foothold inside, Iraqi Kurdistan. So that area may end up being an area of competition between Turkey and Iran. So it's a very complicated game, and I'm not, that keen on sort of laying out some sort of objective trends that is going to stay that way, because the situation is extremely fluid, and there are many actors that keep changing their positions. The region has become extremely complicated precisely because everybody is trying to sort of develop some sort of an independent approach. And not that they are successful, but nevertheless, everybody is trying, as these, different areas are shifting positions, everybody else has to react. So the situation is very fluid and quite improvised.
Yeah. This shows me, like, in terms of Turkey's intervention in Iraq, of course, if you look at the map, southeast Turkey is like Kurdish territory, traditionally, etc. And it's contiguous to the other Turkish territory in Syria, Iraq, and Iran, right? So this is an important thing. He's trying, Erdogan, for instance, he's trying to appease the Iraqi Kurdistan, so that he can, like, kind of extinguish or at least minimize the Turkish problem in terms of Kurdistan. But then, insofar as Iran is concerned, Iran actually says that we have more things in common with Turkey. I mean, along the lines you were talking, then what divides us, they are divided on Syria. They don't see eye to eye on Syria, but they say like there's trade relations and there's
Absolutely.
these other kinds of cooperation, etc. But in terms of you put the larger question, which is the competition that's happening now between Russia, I mean, if you want to go global, Russia, China, on the one hand, at least that, and then the US and Western Europe on the other, including, like, say, Turkey, then that would change the dynamics with that. And then, because which is the, like, main link in the chain that really would determine the rest of it, you know, I mean, the positions of both countries, like, say, Turkey, Iran, and the US for that matter.
Yeah. You know, it's very hard to say at this point. I mean, there is no doubt that given the policies that the United States has pursued since the Bush administration, that has been a policy of trying to completely isolate Iran, okay? The Iranians have had in many ways haven't had no other choice but to try to convince the Russians and the Chinese or to try to use them in a way to counter this attempt at isolation. Now, neither the Chinese nor the Russians have shown any interest in developing a strategic relationship with Iran, okay? In fact, the only interest that they have shown is, given what has happened in Russia, for example, is to use Iran to gain more leverage in relationship to the United States. Okay, so for example, on the nuclear issue, the Russians were able very cleverly to convince the United States to withdraw its anti-missile system from Eastern Europe in exchange for the Russians to agree to sanctions against Iran. So they have been able, you know, because Iran effectively, perhaps because of its size, because of the nature of its revolution, is rather lonely country strategically, and it hasn't been able to develop any kind of a concrete strategic relationship with any of these countries. So all of these things will come into question. I mean, there is no doubt that that Turkey remains within the, you know, within the European sphere and Euro-American sphere, while Iran has been pushed towards this Eastern Bloc. But all of these things can come under question, because if indeed United States and Iran manage to do a restart button on their relationship, this very problematic relationship for the past 32 years, and then all of these equations would fall apart, because, you know, Iran and United States used to be strategic partners in the past. In the pre-revolutionary period, that was the closest relationship United States had in the region. And United States has never recovered from, quote unquote, losing Iran. And so if this relationship not necessarily it can never turn back to the old relationship, because that relationship was a patron-client relationship. And the Iranian Revolution will not allow that, unless there is major transformation in Iran, which not many people foresee. The relationship cannot go back to the patron-client relationship. But if there is some sort of a cooperative framework laid out, then all those things sort of end up changing. You know, United States and Iran will have a much better relationship to Iraq, because both of them are major players there. They will have much more cooperative relationship in Afghanistan. Obviously, Iran has very, very serious issues with, quote unquote, Sunni fundamentalism or Sunni radicalism that presents itself in Afghanistan, in Saudi Arabia, and so on. And those are common interests that would allow a reorientation in the Middle East. And in that reorientation, then the Iranians would have an upper hand in relationship to Turkey. The difference, however, and this is very important, the reason Turkey has become so upcoming in relationship to the rest of the region is a recalibration of its domestic politics, okay? That is to say, by being able to, first of all, economically do well after a period that it did not do well, very high inflation and so on. The Islamist party that has come to power has been able to civilianize the government of Turkey. So the military has been defanged. You know, Turkey's government still has many authoritarian characteristics, but it has been civilianized. And so domestic politics in Turkey looks much better than Iran. The Iranians, after the 2009 election and the fact that they were unable to carry an election, that there was no protest. And since then, there has been a move towards an increasingly repressive authoritarian government. The kind of soft power that they used to have in the region has been undermined by Iranian domestic politics. And of course, because of the sanctions, the Iranian economy that has tremendous amount of potential has been thoroughly undermined. So now it is Iran that is in the grips of very high inflation, in the grips of very dissatisfied population, or at least a large chunk of the population that is dissatisfied. And then also finally, a very clear move towards authoritarianism. And it is that dynamic that makes Turkey looks, you know, in that competition, much more appealing in relationship to the kind of changes that are going on in the region. However, if Iran manages to recalibrate its domestic politics by its next election, which is in 2013, then, you know, and resolve its America problem, which is, you know, an America that is insistent on isolating Iran and economically suffocating Iran through what it calls crippling sanctions, then Iranian dynamics will have to change. So, you know, the reason I'm hesitant to talk about this competition merely you know, in geopolitical terms, in the sense that, you know, Iran has aspirations and Turkey has aspirations. There is that. There is no doubt about that. But, you know, we are talking about two countries that at this particular point are facing a very, very different set of circumstances. And Turkey is at the height of its power. Because it is with, you know, it is doing well economically. It is sort of within, operating within the context of the Western influence, while Iran is being squeezed to the max by the international system. So the question of if Iran manages to get out of that squeeze, you know, through the power play that it has engaged in, through its nuclear program, then Iran will be placed in a very, very different position than it is now.
Yeah. That's a tall order, though. I mean, that's why you have all the ifs and all that.
No, but the point is that, you know, what Iran has done and is that it has brought United States and other regional powers. You know, if you remember, you know, just up to a month ago, everybody was talking about the military attack against Iran. So, and what the Iranians did was to essentially say, bring it on, okay? Now, obviously, they did so in order to make a point, because, you know, it's truly stupid for the Iranians to engage in a war against the United States that is massively more powerful than Iran. But what the Iranian government effectively did was to show everybody in the world how dangerous it is to pursue a policy that will engulf the whole region. So through that power play, now we have a process of engagement with the United States along with the European powers to try to resolve this Iran question. And a meeting was held in Turkey over Iran's nuclear program. And for the first time in a long period of time, since 2005, there was an agreement to begin a process of sustained engagement, not just go in one time and come out of the meeting, to try to resolve some of these major issues of conflict between Iran and mostly the United States. And those issues have to do with Iran's nuclear program. It has to do with Iran's presence in Lebanon through Hezbollah. It has to do with Iran's opposition to the peace process, which no longer Israel-Palestinian issue, and the Iran's insistence that if there's going to be any regional resolution to the problems, Iran should be on the table. Now, this is very important. So if Iran manages to get that, okay, then the policy of isolating Iran has failed. And you know, this is something that will be worked out, not in the next 10 years or so, but effectively in the coming year. And if not, then if it doesn't get resolved, then the whole region might be engulfed in a much bigger conflict than it was, even during the Iraq War.
That's because one of the main hurdles to rapprochement between Iran and the United States, I say, would be Israel and the Israeli lobby in this country. I mean, and this is, I mean, you're talking about the huge influence and well entrenched over decades. So that would be one major thing. The other thing is Turkey. Again, I mean, with all what you have said is an excellent discussion. Turkey is still trying to figure out its role, in the Middle East, and hitting like Syria and Iraq now, diplomatically and everything else, to try and counter Iran's situation. But if we go back to the map, I want to show Iran and some of the influences, geostrategic influences on Iran that would work maybe in Turkey's favor. Like, where's Turkmenistan? Turkmenistan is right on top of Iran, basically, I mean, at least on the map. And the Turks now, they have this thing called pan-Turkish Turkish countries, pan-Turkism. And not only like Turkmenistan, but you can talk about,
Azerbaijan,
Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and all that. So that is an important thing that really works not in favor of Iran. That's why Iran is very much interested in neutralizing Turkey from Central Asia. And on that, perhaps they share something with Russia, because the Russians don't want the Turks to be influential in Central Asia. But then, the Taliban are up and coming in Afghanistan, it seems to me, and we know the historic relations between Iran and Taliban when the Taliban were in Afghanistan. And then we have Pakistan. The question is, where would Pakistan be in relationship to that kind of global, lineup?
Okay. Iranians' strategic thinking has always considered Pakistan to be the most dangerous country to Iran. I mean, of course, there was Iraq because of the war, but not necessarily because Pakistan by itself is a dangerous place in the sense, or the leadership is dangerous, but they have always considered Pakistan to be a very unstable area. And precisely, and of course, as you know, the historical problem that Iran had with Taliban. But that's precisely where the Iranian interest and American interest tend to converge. And it is here that, one cannot ignore the outside powers that are there. So if indeed Turkey is trying to, develop relationships that would, in a sense, agitate the kind of fundamentalism that would ultimately also threaten American interest in the region, then, other things come into play. Now, in relationship to Central Asia, since the downfall of Soviet Union, that has always been an issue. This is going back to 1989, the Turkish, very aggressive foreign policy in Central Asia and so on. And the Iranian sort of laissez-faire, sitting back and essentially saying that that area is the area of our civilizational influence. And these areas will eventually develop closer relationship with us than they would do with other countries. And Iranian foreign policy has always been criticized by many of not playing a much more active role. But Iranians have argued, the Tajiks speak Persian, ultimately you have all sorts of a variety of relationships that will work out in the favor of Iranians. But you're right, Iran has very serious issues with Azerbaijan. Part of that has to do with Azerbaijan's relationship with Israel. Israel is using Azerbaijan, some people have argued, as an area where they can possibly use ultimately to attack Iran. Iran is a surrounded country, no doubt about it. But at the same time, Iran is a big country, and it's very, very difficult with a lot of resources. So even the Turks, even though there is that competition, there is also quite a bit of reliance on Iranian energy resources. So, while there are differences of opinion in terms of a full-fledged antagonistic relationship that, for example, we are seeing between Iran and Saudi Arabia, it really, hasn't developed into that yet. And I doubt that it will, because both countries understand each other's strengths and weaknesses in relationship to each other. So.
And also, like the emerging pole in global politics now is very important. Russia, China, the BRICS countries, and who else follows with them. Despite the fact that you say like Russia, and I agree with that, Russia is using Iran to make better deals with the U.S. To ease the pressure on Russia itself. The fact of the matter, these are like, in my judgment, would be temporary things, because the larger thing is that the competition that's arising between Russia and China on the one hand, and the BRICS countries, and the U.S. and the Western powers, and to the point that where these other countries talking about forming their own World Bank, and first of all, have more influence in the World Bank and IMF, etc. But ultimately, perhaps, like, who needs this World Bank? Let's do our own, So it'll be like a global split, in a way that hasn't been seen, not even during the Soviet Union. So I'm looking at this and saying, like, Iran ultimately could, because of all the other problems that we have, like, Israel as a major hurdle in, like, U.S.-Iran relationship, good relations and stuff like that. I see, like, Iran's fate is with that kind of pole rather than the other.
Well, the problem is that pole is a complicated pole.
Absolutely.
Okay, so you have India in there.
Yes.
Okay,
and
you have India, and you have, so there is a conflict between India and China. You have Brazil in there in BRICS. Now there is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is an organization of Russia and China and other, Central Asian stance. Iran has tried to enter the Shanghai, and it has an observer position, but neither the Chinese nor the Russians have allowed Iran to enter. Iran continues to be one of the most strategically lonely countries in the world. And that is precisely why, for example, it has gotten itself into so much trouble in relationship to the nuclear issue. I mean, if you make comparisons, for example, between with North Korea, a country, quote unquote, engaged in much more egregious both human rights violations as well as nuclear violations. United States has engaged in sustained talks, in variety of forums with North Korea, and they have diplomatic relations. But Iran essentially has been a country that, as I suggested before, either other countries have used to gain advantages from United States, or has not been able to develop any kind of sustained support. Whether in that sense, it is quite an anomaly within the context of this global order, emerging global order that we are talking about. That is to say, ultimately, it aspires to this foreign policy that Khomeini talked about, which is neither West nor East. And yet at the same time, because of its very strange domestic politics that does not allow its own population to participate in the political process in a meaningful way, or at least not every part of the society, it has been unable to fulfill that aspiration. So it is caught in a very, very difficult dynamic. And unless it manages to resolve its America problem on one hand, as well as its domestic problem on the other hand, it will not, be able to fulfill that aspiration. But if it can manage to do that, in the Middle East, it will actually be a very, very strange country that is not part and parcel of any kind of security relationship with any other part, any other major player in the world. Whether it will do that or not, or it will, disintegrate, is something to be seen.
Yeah, once a few years back, one asked me, like, oh, do you think like Syria would disengage from Iran,
Yeah.
Because there was a lot of pressure on Syria from like even before 2005 to do so. And I said, well, the Syrians are not stupid.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I mean, the flip of that is that the Iranians have, in some way, and we talked a little bit about it, formed their own kind of axis, let's say.
Yeah.
Now it's Iraq, Syria,
Exactly.
parts of Lebanon, and maybe Palestine, and so on.
Exactly.
So that might give them some kind of breathing space. We shall see. But the fact of the matter is, I'm looking at how the nuclear issue is playing between the U.S. and Iran, and how that is actually used to squeeze Iran even more, to make them cry uncle.
Make them cry uncle without disintegrate. It's very, because if Iran disintegrates, sitting right in the middle of the Middle East, it's a very dangerous dynamic. So it's hard to make Iran cry uncle without disintegrating is the issue. And so far it hasn't worked. But for the Iranians, it hasn't worked either.
Yeah.
They haven't cried uncle, but they are being squeezed nevertheless. So
similarly, like Iraq is already divided basically.
Yeah, exactly.
They're trying now, the West and the U.S. trying to divide Syria to weaken Iran, as we have suggested, right? So I mean, the one probability, and quite significant one, is that the whole region might just go up in flames. Hopefully not, but that is, one probability of the other probability is that if the U.S.
They have said repeatedly, if you make us insecure, we will make the whole region insecure.
Right. The
So
Syrians, the Syrians have
that's
said that too, So it's a dangerous situation, but
Exactly.
we'll get more discussion going on later on, but we're flat out of time. And thank you very much
Good to be with you.
for doing this discussion with us. And thank you very much, and we'll see you next semester, because this is the last for this semester. Okay, see you in September. Okay.